Okay, so is the live streaming started? Okay. All good? Okay. Well, good morning and welcome to the open session of the Waterloo Region Police Service Board meeting for November the 15th, it looks like. Require a motion to reconvene in open session. Can I get a mover, seconder? Doug moves, Sandy second. All those in favor? Okay, thank you. We're now reconvened in open session. Before we begin, I just want to acknowledge that we acknowledge that the land on which we gather today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements, and their contributions to our community. We offer this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples of Canada. Is there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none from the board. Closed from the closed meeting today. I don't think there's any recommendations that come from the closed meeting. We have a delegation today. Harold Druitz joins us. I think is he on the line? Here he is. Welcome, Harold, and the floor is yours. 10 minutes.
I thank you very much. I recently made a presentation at the public input session on October 26th. This was the first time I did this, and I did not realize the majority of the Waterloo Region Police Board would be present. I do have another topic I want to present to you, and that is taxpayers' affordability position. Before I do this, after several years of not presenting at one of your meetings, I first want to thank you and your decision in appointing Mark Krall as the current police chief. He is an excellent choice for many reasons, especially from working his way up through the ranks as an officer in Waterloo Region. As I get on in years, more and more, I realize the value of experience and familiarity. Too often, positions like this are filled with someone parachuted in from the outside. I've seen this too many times during my career, and often things really do not work out well. On a personal basis, I have worked with Chief Mark Krall in his previous capacities, and I've always found him to try and put himself in the position of the person in front of him, and most importantly, being a good listener and making his best efforts to help. Before I go on with my presentation today, Chief, I agree with you 100% about your position of the surplus police funds. No, they should not be allocated to any other government organization. If the surplus reserve gets to be too high in the coming years, then I'd like to see some of that money used to decrease the tax rate. So that's my position on that. Now for the actual reason for my presentation today. One key word that has continued to come up over the last few years is affordability. We are now reaching a critical point of unsustainability. We seem to be living in a different world post-COVID. Since 2020, the consumer price index, or inflation, here in Ontario has gone up approximately 14 to 16% over the past 3 years. More alarming is the cost of food, groceries, which have gone up even more to approximately 25 to 27% during this time. In addition to the rise of inflation, the Bank of Canada key interest rate was as low as 0.5% in January and February 2022, eventually rising to 5.0% in June 12, 2023, a tenfold increase. This is an increase the population has not seen since prior to the Great Recession of 2008. For the last 15 years, a younger generation has not seen interest rates this high, and I suggest never thought they would ever see such a rapid change in interest rate increases in their lifetime. I trust some of you remember the 1980s, the inflation rate, the high interest rate, and further, the high unemployment rate. It was President Reagan that came up with the term the misery index, which is the addition of the inflation rate and the unemployment rate. It was these two factors that combined to be detrimental to one's economic well-being. Their combined value is useful as an indicator of overall economic health. Recently, I coined a new index, the squeeze index, which is the combined value of the inflation rate and the Bank of Canada key rate, interest rate. Current economic conditions affect the generations differently. While an increase in interest rate is more welcome for the senior generation, should they have investments or are homeowners, this does not offset the increase in food prices and other increases. Most seniors do not have a defined benefit plan, never mind a pension plan tied to the CPI index. Much of their income is tied to their OAS and CPB benefits, which thankfully are tied to CPI index. This is precisely why governments and government agencies need to better take into consideration the CPI index and the taxpayers' non-affordability into consideration when compiling their budgets. On the other hand, the younger generation has a double whammy challenge. They are starting to their lives and families after high school, college, or university. Most wage and salary increases are only 1% of the CPI index. Another major cost is shelter costs. We all know rents are increasing at an alarming rate, and billions of dollars of home mortgages for those that have been able to get into the housing markets have been coming due in the last year and will continue to come due in the next few years, increasing their existing interest rate payments by at least 4+%, a difference between the Bank of Canada rate for the last several years versus now 5% less 0.5%, further adding to the affordability crisis. Waterloo Region food banks are experiencing unprecedented use, including more families. Very alarming. Now, even what I call working poor are going to the food bank. Families are having to make difficult choices. Do we buy food or heat our homes? Many restaurants are seeing less customers. Even my dear wife and I are going out less. Heck, we can't even believe the cost of taking our grandchildren to McDonald's. And yes, we eat less steaks and rib meals than we used to. In our circle of acquaintances, most couples are adjusting in similar manners. Family savings have been depleted due to increased costs. Students are having challenges finding affordable housing. On the corporate side, credit card interest rates are increasing, and so are bank loan losses. This leads to a difficult conclusion. The population is quickly reaching a point which, with potential tax increases coming in higher than CPI or inflation, the ability to afford these increases will no longer be sustainable. People are squeezed beyond their ability to manage these increased costs. I cannot overstate the taxpayers' affordability concerns must be at the top of your and your staff's minds in approaching finalizing the 2024 budget and into the 2025 budget process. Options for delivering police and other related services need careful line-by-line examination. The goal is to analyze and implement adjustment to personnel resources and processes utilizing improved technology and methodology to further increase efficiency and reduce or eliminate areas that are costly under current practices. Other jurisdictions may have models to assist in this exercise. With the population having to make difficult choices, the WRS or PS must now undertake the same exercise. I say this also partially in the fact that the Ontario government is looking into nursing and the duties of nurses are changing, and maybe some study needs to come from the province and what police duties really are, and where other than a constable can do some jobs other than a high-paying paid constable. That's my presentation, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Drewitz. Any questions from the board? Seeing that, thank you for taking the time and joining us this morning. Appreciate it. Okay, I think we're on to consent agenda items. Any questions or anyone from the board want to have something pulled off? Tony.
Yeah, through you, Chair McLean. I would put the motion forward for the consent agenda items, but I have two questions, or if I could ask at least. One is in regards with the HR report, which is 8.5, and the other one is the neighborhood policing, which is 8.7. But
Sure. If
I
they're
would
just,
put the motion forward. Yeah, sorry.
yeah, if they're just questions, you move the motions. Can someone second that, and then we'll come back for the questions. Doug seconds the motion. Back to you, Tony.
Yeah, through you, Chair McLean. On the HR dashboard report, I was wondering, I was looking at the non-occupational and occupational absences that are occurring, and I know we report it only by the previous quarter. I was wondering, to get a better perspective of overall trends on how we're doing with those two metrics, could a report, the reporting show a bit longer type of a trend in order for us to get a better handle? I find quarter to quarter, I don't get a real good grasp on a trend of how we're doing on those two metrics. Does that make sense?
Is that Deputy Fenton or Chief?
Yeah, I'll just jump into good morning, Chair McLean, members of the board. Thanks very much for the input, and certainly we can seek to improve the report so that you do see that longer landscape. And before I maybe turn over to the deputy for any comments as well, we're continuing to learn on the wellness journey and making important investments into the wellness unit and broadening our scope throughout the organization. So it's with your input, we're happy to report on that larger landscape. So I don't know if the deputy has any other inputs about the report itself or anything related to the wellness unit and those overtures.
Morning, through you, Chair McLean, and good morning, members of the board, and thank you for the question, Mr. Giovinazzo. So, absolutely, we can look to provide more expanded and long-term trends. Generally speaking, I think you will note in the same report that our outreach and wellness check-ins dramatically rose in Q2 or Q3. This is really a good news story. This is a direct benefit of the board's investment in our members and their wellness. As a result of those investments earlier this year, we were able to add a dedicated sergeant to our wellness and outreach team. So this expansion, in addition to fully staffing our occupational health and safety wellness unit after a period of attrition-based absences in Q2, has really allowed this team to lean into their mandate of member wellness. So by ensuring we are caught up on our wellness annual wellness check-ins for that preventative protection, but also dramatically increasing the number of outreach contacts we have with our members after challenging or traumatic calls. So this ensures that they have the support they need. We are also extremely proud of the work that this team is doing and in support of the members doing the challenging work of policing day in and day out. So generally speaking, I think there's some good news stories in here. We continue to see the absences, but with this increased outreach and wellness focus, we hope the long-term trends, as you pointed out, will go in the right direction.
I appreciate the context there, because it at least helps me get a right frame of mind of how our members are doing and where we need to concentrate our efforts.
Okay, and Chief, so you and the deputy will bring a revised report with some of that lens. Perfect. Tony.
Yeah, my second, maybe more so comments or questions are regarding the neighborhood policing. You know, as a board, we get to see the reports from Deputy Davis and from the chief monthly. But I think what hit me here, and I felt I didn't want it to be buried within the consent agenda, is what I would call the material increases on severity relating to impaired driving, robberies, assaults, weapons, internet frauds, trafficking. I mean, the increases over a 5-year trend are, you know, for the vast majority, greater than 25% increase over the 5-year trend, which to me, I use the word alarming. But I was hoping, just as we asked Deputy Fenton for a little bit more context in the wellness checks, if maybe through you, Chief, if yourself or the deputy could provide a little bit more context, because I don't want that to go unnoticed as to what our community is facing with regards with these crime rates.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And it's an important point. And I know that, as you mentioned, the board gets to see the immediate landscape and some of the year over year. But I'll turn it over to Deputy Davis in a moment. We're always looking at that long range horizon for our crime intervention, crime suppression efforts. So maybe I'll just turn to the deputy to speak to how that goes into some of our planning and the total landscape.
Thank you very much. The chief has said it. We have been aware of these numbers now for a couple of years. They're reported every year in our crime severity index, our calls for services. We have been looking primarily at which of the ones that have the most impact on community, which of the ones have looking at clearance rates for these occurrences, and then trying to come up with a strategy, and that's really around our crime suppression strategy about how we tackle these incidents. So how are we looking at bail reform? How are we looking at enforcement? How are we looking at our proactive efforts to address each of these types of crime trends? And right now, I would say what we're trying to do is enhance our crime suppression strategy to actually do that. And it becomes an organizational approach. It's not one unit, it's not one area of the organization, but it's how does investigative services support neighborhood policing? How do we funnel information back and forth? How do we make evidence-based decisions on where we actually place our enforcement initiatives? And then how are we holding ourselves accountable with our stats, with measuring our outcomes and our outputs for the work that we're doing? So this is a long-term strategy. We are seeing incremental improvements in certain areas, but this is really year one of a long-term strategy around crime suppression that we've done a bit of a shift to focus significantly in these areas.
Yeah, like to me, it wasn't just the numbers, the dramatic numbers, but also these types of crimes. The complexity has arisen as well. When you talk about internet frauds or trafficking, it's multi-jurisdictional with other areas or other countries. And so it just seems that the complexity of these crimes as well has increased as well. But I appreciate some of the context and how you tailored it into being addressed within our strategic plan as we move forward. So thank you. That's all I had, Sheriff McLean.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on the any of the items of the consent agenda? Seeing none, it's moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? There is none. So that's we'll move on. Item 9.0, no business arising from the minutes, no correspondence. Police services reports, there is none. We're on to Chief of Police reports, 12.1. Chief, do you want to introduce Dr. Hassan Siddiqui and the intelligence notes?
Thanks very much. Yeah, very pleased to have the next two reports have Hassan walk us through our commitment to race and identity-based data collection lens analysis for how we conduct our core business. And so the first report will be to intelligence notes, and then he will stay on for the following report as well. So over to you, Hassan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief. Good morning, Chair McLean and members of the board. I hope that you will be patient with me as I try and share my screen correctly. Even after 4 years of this wouldn't be a stressful, this would be a stressful thing to do, but I feel like in 20 years we'll still be stressed about sharing our screen. Can everyone see the PowerPoint? Okay. Yep. Awesome.
PowerPoint is there, and your mic is better. It was a little sketchy there, but you're much better now. So back to you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
If at any point it drops off, just let me know. So as Chief indicated, I'll be starting by talking a little bit about intelligence notes and the race-based data collection strategy related to that. So a brief summary, and I know it's a review for the members of the board, but just for background context, either it's mandated by legislation or required by the board, WRPS officers are currently required to provide perceived race in 4 selected interactions. Those 4 interactions are use of force,
Hassan, it's doing some, it sounds like we're listening to Star Wars. There's a little bit of a warble
Oh,
there.
no.
I don't know whether you can, it was good, but it's hard to hear now. Give it one more try. That wasn't just me. That was, yeah, okay.
Hassan, if you try and speak again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, look, we got. He's called a friend. They're looking into it. Just bear with us. I think he's gone out and coming back in to see if he can get a better connection so he can be heard better. He's now left. There he is. He's coming back in now.
Mr. Chair, if we were in person, we wouldn't have that problem.
Well, we'll take that under advisement, Doug. I think we're going to have a report from the chief on that imminently. Okay, I think Hassan has just come back in. Did he not come back in? Maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Talk in the calendar, but you realize that you. Hassan just let me know that Zoom shut down on him. He'll be back in 1 second.
Thank you. Thank you. There, it looks like he's back.
Chair McLean, I might suggest if this persists and we're unable to resolve it soon, we could move to potentially 12.3 and then come back to 12.1 and 12.2. But we can obviously, I think there's time in the total agenda to give this some.
Okay, we may do that. Let's okay, Hassan, let's give it one more crack. If there's still trouble, we'll move on and come back to you. So give it one more whirl here.
I'm so sorry about that. This is what all the Zoom nightmares are made of. Can you hear me okay now?
It's a little. Let's go with it. It's a little light, but it's there you go. Try again.
All right.
Perfect.
A very kind coworker came and gave me a backup set of headphones. So, all righty. So, yeah, I guess I'll try to run through this quicker now. So either as mandated by legislation required by the board, WRPS officers are currently required to provide perceived race and force selected interactions, that's use of force, regulate interactions, intel notes, and search of persons in custody. And WRPS has been providing this data since 2020. So under the guidance of our academic partners, Dr. Les Jacobs and Dr. Lauren Foster, we use perceived race data as a tool for uncovering and addressing systemic racism wherever it might exist. By centering person characteristics, including race, in the analyses, observed patterns in data related to the 4 selected interactions will help to determine the scope of the problem and the representation of individuals with particular social identities in the selected interactions, the contributing contextual factors within WRPS, the training needs and track what approaches to service delivery work across different communities, and hopefully it'll serve as a starting point for conversations with community and WRPS members to strengthen trust, accountability, and transparency. How we achieve these goals is through a multiple benchmark analytic strategy to flag and identify areas of concern, which are then explored through research or further investigation. Our analytic strategy is designed to illuminate the drivers of disparity with emphasis on police decisions. And as we talk about the drivers of disparity, here they are. So to help from data collection to organizational change, it's helpful to consider the reasons we might see disparity in police data. The OACP's race and identity-based data group has helpfully articulated 4 drivers of disparity. Based on the literature within the police sector, the drivers of disparity in police data can be grouped into 4 main areas. Officer biases, which involves both conscious and unconscious bias that officers might hold that can impact their decisions and behavior. Service-specific practices and policies, such as deployment practices, specific to search of persons criteria that could introduce disparities. Another driver may be the way in which the members of the public interact with the police, say the way in which they're forthcoming with information, whether they are nervous and perhaps seem suspicious, whether they are evasive. This will impact how the members of the public is perceived in their encounter with the police and may influence how an officer deals with them. And research has demonstrated that there are racial differences in how people perceive the police and racial differences in how people interact with the police. And so these may also inform disparities. And lastly, there are a variety of social factors that push and pull people towards crime and certain types of crime, especially. The purpose of the Ontario data standards is to help public sector organizations identify social factors that lead to inequitable outcomes across the system. So that's the intro. Now we're going to get into the topic of this specific board report, which is intelligence notes. So all intelligence notes are created at an officer's discretion. Intelligence notes are used to document persons and/or activities for investigative purposes. They're most commonly used to link people, locations, and vehicles together. Identifying information in an intelligence note can be collected where there's no interaction. So this may be a passive observation, where the identifying information is derived from a third-party source or already known by the officer, or where the interaction with the person was first lawful. This report presents intelligence notes entered between July 1st and September 30th, 2023. So here we have the quarterly breakdowns of the number of intelligence notes between 2022 and 2023. In 2022, there were 782 intelligence notes, which roughly splits into about 200 notes per quarter. This year, we've already outnumbered that tally with 816 intelligence notes created so far. In the first quarter of 2023, there were 309 intelligence notes. In the second quarter, there were 263. And in Q3, we see that 244 intelligence notes were created. The increase in the number of intelligence notes observed in 2023 is likely the result of in-service training currently being delivered on race-based data collection and the application of a human rights framework to intelligence gathering. This framework was developed in partnership with our race-based data collection steering group and academic partners, Dr. Lauren Foster and Dr. Les Jacobs, who are both human rights experts. So when we break it down further, it's important to know that a single occurrence can result in multiple intelligence notes. Of the 244 intelligence notes created, 105 focused on individuals, 91 were created about locations, while 48 were about unoccupied vehicles. So despite the decrease in the overall number of intelligence notes, we see that more intelligence notes this quarter were created with a focus on people. So in Q2, there were 82 that were person subjects focused. In Q3, we see that there's 105. When officers create an intelligence note, they're asked to identify the rationale for documenting that information. A single intelligence note can have multiple rationales, so the number will sum to greater than 244. So similar to Q1 and Q2 this year, intelligence notes in Q3 were most often created to document associations between people, locations, and vehicles followed by documenting information on drugs or drug trafficking. So the race-based data collection strategy and the analytics strategy will focus only on the 105 intelligence notes that focused on person subjects. The Ontario data standards for the identification and monitoring of systemic racism suggest two different analytical approaches for identifying systemic racism. The first is racial disproportion. So this is where we take the proportion of racialized individuals within a police data set and compare that to population proportions. The assumption underlying this comparison is that Intel notes would be created randomly with everyone in the population having an equal chance of being included in an intelligence note. But we know that intelligence notes are not created on random, and in line with academic research and sector reporting, the race-based data collection strategy analytic plan is moving away from just using racial disproportions and moving to a multiple benchmark strategy. So this multiple benchmark strategy involves using disparity ratios. Here, disparity ratios are used to compare the proportion of individuals from racialized groups compared to the proportion of white individuals at different points within enforcement. What we're asking with this ratio is, are groups represented differently within intelligence notes? So if the ratio exceeds the cutoff threshold, this is considered a flag. And then the next step would be to examine the context underlying the comparison in more depth to determine why we might see these patterns of representation. This sort of analysis is really valuable because it makes visible the impacts on individuals and their families by highlighting the potential higher likelihood of being involved in a police interaction for some racialized individuals as compared to white individuals. It allows for analysis that drills deeper into the data to reveal the likelihood for why we might see a given racial disparity. It's also important to note that all of our ratios are based on small numbers and as such need to be treated with caution, as the addition of even or removal of even a few cases can dramatically impact the results. Okay. So we've looked at a lot of person subject characteristics. I'll start with representation based on age. Here, our gray bars represent the proportion of individuals in the population based on the 2021 census data. The blue bars represent the proportion of individuals in intelligence notes by perceived age category as identified by the officers creating the intelligence note. A disproportion for all of our graphs here would represent the blue bars being taller than the gray bars, whereas a disparity would be represented by the blue bars being taller than other blue bars. What we see is that in terms of both disparity and disproportion in intelligence notes created this quarter, there's overrepresentation of those aged 18 to 39 years old. And this age group is consistently overrepresented in intelligence notes in both Q1 and Q2 also. Moving on to gender, we see that the proportion for intelligence notes for males is greater. The male blue bar is taller than the residential population for males and the proportion of intelligence notes for females. So in terms of both disproportion and disparity, men are overrepresented. And again, this is the same pattern we've seen in the 2022 annual data and throughout 2023. And now with respect to perceived race, so the gray bars again represent the proportion of the local population based on 2021 census data, while the blue bars represent the proportion of individuals in intelligence notes. For this person characteristic, we have to see different trends based on which indices we focus on. There is no evidence of racial disparity. When comparing racialized groups to the white racial group, as recommended by the Ontario data standards and in line with our multiple benchmarking approach, we see no evidence that racialized groups are overrepresented within Q3 intelligence notes. For disproportion, when comparing to population demographics, intelligence notes overrepresent Black and Middle Eastern racialized groups. The blue bars here are taller than the gray bars. This is a similar pattern to what was seen with intelligence notes created in previous quarters in 2023. All righty. And now in this final graph, we'll move on to the multiple benchmarking strategy to better understand why we see racial disproportions. Within each racial group, I calculated the percentage of intelligence notes created for each rationale and then compared that to the proportion across racial groups. So just as an example, overall, there were 24 intelligence notes created for Black individuals in Q3. Of these, all 24 documented information related to associations. So 100% of intelligence notes involving Black individuals were created to document associations. So that would be the first sort of dark blue bar you see on the far left. There are 53 total intelligence notes created on white individuals in Q3, sorry. Of these 51 notes, 96.2% documented information related to associations. That's the light blue bar you see on the far left. So to examine whether or not we see any disparity, we would just compare the 100% against the 96.2% to see if they're roughly equal or if there's any, or if at least they're below our cutoff threshold. In this case, within associations, they are. So we did this for all of our various incident types and rationales, but we'll just focus on the ones that we see a disparity. So for breaking and entering, Black versus white individuals were overrepresented in intelligence notes, and similarly, so were Middle Eastern individuals. So of the 24 intelligence notes involving Black persons, 33.3% of them were related to breaking and entering, while 35.3% were related to breaking and entering for Middle Eastern individuals. This compares to only 11.3% involving white person subjects. Additionally, we see Black individuals were overrepresented in notes related to firearms. Of the 24 intelligence notes involving Black person subjects, 37.5% were related to firearms. This compares to a much smaller percentage, about 9.4%, sorry, for white person subjects, which results in a disparity ratio of 4.0. Lastly, we'll note that there is a disparity in the other category. The other category, it's important to note, doesn't actually refer to like a miscellaneous category, but actually refers to sort of a compilation of all other intelligence purposes that are not already outlined in the graph. As a result, it's kind of difficult to dissect with only so little data. The specific rationale is being represented here. This is the first time we've ever seen any disparity in the other category, and if the trend continues, it'll be important to dig further into what might be the source of this disparity. And of course, as part of this multiple benchmarking strategy, the next steps of this analytic plan will be to see if the pattern is repeated that we see in intelligence notes, if it emerges anywhere else, for example, in calls for service or charges laid. And if it does, then we would triangulate this pattern against other types of information within and external to WRPS to gain a better understanding of why we might see the overrepresentation of Black and Middle Eastern individuals in particular categories. And that why is what takes us back to our disparities. So, in summary, Intel notes were most frequently created to document associations and information related to drugs and drug trafficking. Replicating previous patterns, when taken individually, younger compared to older, male compared to female, and Black and Middle Eastern compared to white individuals were overrepresented in intelligence notes. For the latter two mentioned groups, this is particularly true for intelligence notes created to monitor activity related to breaking and entering and robbery. WRPS's race-based data collection strategy will work towards improving our data collection and analytic practices with the goals of identifying racial disparities that might exist in police-public interactions and developing tangible actions to address those disparities. By engaging in multiple benchmarking, we can consider all four drivers of disparity, how they might play a role in racial disparities. This will be done under the guidance of Dr. Les Jacobs and Dr. Lauren Foster, who, as I said before, are human rights experts and our academic partners on this strategy. And thank you so much for your patience. I really, really appreciate it. With all the technical difficulties, I thank you so much.
Well, thanks to your friend, whoever donated their headset that was fully charged. Good on you. Thank you for doing that. Okay. Any questions or comments from the board? Don't see any. I guess I just wanted to be clear for it right from the beginning. The increase we're collecting more data, but we're also there's better tracking of it, and it's leading to more accurate and particular observations or better use of that data. Is that fair? I think that was at the beginning of the presentation, because I think the increases alone, as we're starting this process and getting more refined and have more historical data, is important to see that. I just wanted to ask on that.
Thanks for your question. Hassan, do you want to you want to strive for a response there?
For sure. Chief, thanks. Yeah, the increase in the intelligence notes created, just speaking to some of our sergeants in intelligence services, they've spoken consistently about the value that having more intelligence notes has had, whether it's the writing of warrants or just like in general intelligence gathering. We're also seeing that a wider variety of individuals are creating these intelligence notes. Was there something specific about the race-based data that was related to your question, or just
No, I mean, that part was the more that we gather and the better we are at collecting it, we're going to have more rich interpretation of that. And I think that's what we've seen over certainly the 2 or 3 years of seeing this report. It's not the number in and of itself, it's the historical trend and what we do with that. That's what I think I heard you say at the beginning of the presentation.
Yes, 100%. As we get more data, it just allows us to break it down further with kind of more statistical power than if we only had a few occurrences.
Okay, thank you. And my apologies to my colleague Karen. I was on the wrong screen and didn't see you, so I would have gone to you first. My apologies. Over to you, Karen.
Thanks, Ian. Through you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. In terms of would the board at some point see a summary report using those 4 sources of data that you referenced that would give us an idea of the so what's, if you will, in each of those 4 quadrants? The scope of racial disparities within selected interactions, contributing contextual factors, those 4 quadrants, would we see any action or see how the data may have influenced work in those areas at some point?
So I'll maybe start. So it's a good thought. So just for some context, the collective commitment to this across the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police is really just being launched this year. So I think moving forward, you'll see greater across sector, across policing collaboration on how we understand these drivers of disparity across the province. It's just of note, the intelligence notes is a WRPS endeavor. It's something that we struck, as a commitment at the time that regulated interactions or the carding street checks legislation was changing several years ago. So this is a unique report that we are sharing and encouraging others to adopt if they see value as we do. But we'll continue to learn more moving forward. So you've given us maybe a good pointer in terms of what would be insightful and useful for the board and the community. And just one last point is the team, Hassan, Geraldine Stafford from EDI, and Mandy Williams, and others are also seeking to engage the community on the race and identity-based data collection strategy in the months to come. So that's our engagement with the community for them to understand what we're doing, led by our academic partners, and then ensuring that the information we have is getting out to the community so we can have the conversation about the tough stuff. Why are we seeing the trends that we're seeing locally and across Ontario and across Canada as well? And how do we understand how we can address issues of systemic racism and beyond? So it's a great pointer to how we can maybe shape the report moving forward.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we'll move on. I don't see any other hands. I'm on the right screen now, seeing nothing else. I think next report, I think Hassan's staying with us. Chief, use of force Q3.
Thanks very much. And although Deputy Fenton leads this area, I'll jump right to Superintendent Beth Houston and Hassan to walk us through this quarterly report. So over to you both. Thank you.
Good morning. I think Hassan's going to share our presentation and get it up on the screen if we can. Perfect. Thank you. Good morning, Chair McLean and members of the board. I'm pleased to share some information on our Q3 use of force statistics with you this morning. Next slide, please. The current presentation covers data provided from use of force reports from July 1st to September 30th. In this presentation, we will talk about both reportable incidents and use of force reports. A reportable incident refers to those incidents that require a use of force report by legislation and/or WRPS procedure. It is important to know that a single reportable incident may generate several use of force reports, one for each officer. Each use of force report is subject to 3 layers of scrutiny. First, by the staff sergeant of the platoon or unit, next by the senior leader of the unit, branch, or division, and then finally by a use of force sergeant in the training and education branch. Next slide, please. In Q3 2023, there were 97,431 police occurrences and 3,861 arrests. Use of force reports, use of force incidents have decreased from 122 in Q2 to 91 in Q3. This represents a 25% decrease in the number of reportable incidents. The number of modernized use of force reports has gone down from 200 in Q2 to 148 in Q3. However, the proportion of police interactions involving force has stayed the same as previous quarters at 0.1%. Next slide, please. This graph depicts the number of use of force reports created separated by incident types. As in Q1 and Q2, use of force reports were most likely filed in response to weapons calls for service. The second most common call type represented in the use of force reports was person in crisis. Next slide, please. In Q3, relative to Q2, we observed a slight increase in the number of handgun drawn reports and a slight decrease in the number of handgun pointed reports. There was a decrease in the number of rifles drawn and pointed reports. As in Q1 and Q2 this year, no firearms were discharged in Q3. And there was a significant drop in the number of physical control reports. Next slide, please. Overall, there was a significant dip in the number of CEW reports this quarter. While there was a slight increase in the number of CEW drawn reports, all other CEW related reports saw decreases between Q2 and Q3 of this year. Next slide, please. In Q3, there was a decrease in the number of minor subject injuries relative to Q2. As a reminder, minor injuries refer to any injury where a subject was treated by medical staff but not admitted to the hospital. This would include abrasions, puncture wounds, or stitches. And there were no major subject injuries in Q3. And now I will pass it back to Hassan to take you from here. Thanks.
Yeah, let's hope that this one goes better than the last time. So I'll be talking a little bit about the race-based data with respect to modernized use of force reports. As a reminder, when looking at this specific table, starting in 2023, the numbers in the table do not reflect individual people, but rather officer perceptions. So for example, if 4 officers fill a use of force report involving the same subject, all 4 perceptions will be included in the data, even though those perceptions are about the same one person. In Q3, there were 36 overall perceptions of Black individuals in use of force reports. This corresponds to 20% of all perceptions. There were 13 overall perceptions of Middle Eastern individuals in use of force reports. This corresponds to 7% of all perceptions. And the majority of perceptions were of white individuals, 121 total perceptions, which corresponds to about 65% of the data. So when looking at disproportions, Black individuals were overrepresented in use of force reports by a factor of 4.14 in Q3, which is relative to 4.38 in Q2. Middle Eastern individuals were overrepresented in use of force reports by a factor of 2.33 relative to 2.7 in Q2. Latino individuals were overrepresented in use of force reports by a factor of 1.95. This is the first time we've observed a disproportion for this demographic group in 2023. There was no evidence of racial disparity in use of force reports. The highest disparity value was for Black individuals at 0.30. The number is far below the threshold for evidence of racial disparity. The disparity ratio for all demographic groups decreased from Q2 to Q3, other than for the Latino group. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to take them.
Okay, thank you for that report. And it's, again, as we see more of this, it's great to get the historical context of where we're at and how we're interpreting the data. Colleagues, any questions or comments? don't see any hands. I'm on the right screen, Karen, so I would see you if you were, but there is none. Okay, thank you for that. I think we'll move on to 12.3, I believe. Community safety and well-being. Inspector Aaron Mathias, I don't know, Chief or one of the deputies, I'm not sure, wants to introduce this.
Sure, thank you very much. Yeah, I'll be brief. Very pleased to welcome back Inspector Aaron Mathias, who is our Community Safety Partnerships lead, and he's helping to guide our services, collective commitment to the Regional Waterloo's Community Safety Wellbeing Plan. So I'll turn it over to Aaron to walk us through this month's feature.
I will share my screen here. Hopefully everyone can see that. Well, good morning. Thank you, Chief and Chair McLean, members of the board. I'm pleased to join you to speak about some information regarding our response, our evolving response to combating hate within the region of Waterloo, specifically hate-motivated crimes within the region. It's important on this topic to frame our conversation in the concept of community safety and well-being. Anti-hate, anti-racism, anti-oppression, as well as equity, diversity, and inclusion form fundamental pieces of the region's community safety and well-being plan, as we know, formed through extensive community consultation. As with the other priorities of the community safety well-being plan, effectively combating hate will take a multi-sector commitment and community collaboration to develop initiatives aimed at prevention and social development. Today, we'll really look to focus on statistics and information related to hate-motivated crime. And that, if you look at category 3 in this infographic, is the breach of a law or federal statute that includes hate motivation or elements of hate. Maybe worth noting that if charges are pursued at this level or in this category, information related to those facts and issue can be used as an aggravating factor at sentencing. By looking across a 4-year trend, there's been a significant increase in reported incidents, notably between 2021 and 2022. Reported hate crime incidents nearly doubled. Certain factors such as reduction of stigma, advocacy, and additional reporting tools may have led people to report an incident that they may have been reluctant to in previous years. 2023 appears set to meet or surpass our 2022 reports, but we've not seen the dramatic increase of the previous year. Looking more at specific incident types from our 2023 reporting, we can see that the majority of police-reported hate-motivated crimes in Waterloo region were nonviolent, comprising 56%. 44% of those reports were considered to have elements of violence, including simple assault, uttering threats, and classified as other. Almost 37% of all incidents were mischief or property damage. Next, we can look at specific hate motivations and assess trends between 2022 and 2023. When comparing the number of hate-motivated crimes that occurred between January 1 and September 30th across both years, we observed a consistent increase for all hate motivations. Specifically looking at race-related hate incidents were most likely to involve Black individuals. In both 2022 and 2023, race-related hate-motivated crimes were most commonly occurred between April 1st and June 30th. There were no police-reported hate-motivated crimes on the basis of race in Q3 of this year. In all of 2022, moving to the graphic on the right, there were only 3 instances of hate-motivated crime on the basis of sex in Waterloo region. By September 30th of this year, we've already seen 14 instances of hate-motivated crime on the basis of sex. This reinforces the region's commitment to addressing gender-based violence as a main priority under the Community and Safety Wellbeing Plan. Now, just to speak a little bit about our comprehensive and evolving approach to hate-motivated crime. We know that the trauma caused by hate-motivated crime and incidents is widespread and impacts victims and their communities. As a service, we deploy a comprehensive response to victims, communities, and stakeholders to ensure that these acts are investigated fully and timely supports are provided. Alongside our investigative response by patrol and investigative and intelligence services resources, Our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Unit connects with those who are or may be affected by the incident in order to provide supports through investigative updates or through collaboration with the victim services of Waterloo Region. Ongoing investigative support and updated information is gathered by conducting ongoing risk assessments during the investigative phase. Proactive measures involving media, police resource allocation, and community outreach aim to prevent additional incidents while creating social cohesion and reassurance within the community. Continued collaboration with our community partners is vital in combating hate within the region of Waterloo. We recognize the need to move towards a consolidated reporting system, which will provide the most accurate information available, allowing police to provide an accurate landscape of issues to our public safety partners, while using this information to empower the community to develop initiatives to prevent and end hate incidents. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for the report. There we go. Any questions or comments from the board? Don't see any hands. Just one quick question. Again, is this whether it's you, Chief, or Aaron, better reporting? So we're getting better data on this. I'm a little surprised by, and I think I misheard that and read that in Q3, no reported incidents. The eye test, and maybe it's just when it's being captured, the eye test kind of doesn't it doesn't feel like that's the case. It feels like it's kind of ramping up, and I think some of the numbers are showing that. So maybe I've just misheard or misread that.
Yeah, maybe you can speak to that directly, and then there's probably just a broader statement to be made about sort of the hopes of our our partnership and collaborative reporting, and where we're trying to take this as a community. Sorry, Aaron, I don't know if you picked up on that single point of inquiry.
Yes, yeah, and that was the information provided through strategic services. We had Q3 specifically, no police reported hate motivated crimes on the basis of race. So okay. Race specifically, there's other factors involved, obviously, but yes, you did hear correct.
Okay, thank you. Chief, do you want to?
Yeah, and maybe just because I think it's something that's very topical as we look at evolving geopolitics, major concerns about conflicts worldwide. And so we are hearing and seeing globally, nationally, and then provincially some rise of certainly anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and so on. And so we are tracking this locally within WRPS and also through our community partnerships as well. And we are not seeing the levels of spikes and trend increase that some other communities across the world and across Canada are seeing, but we're very much focused on that possibility. And this speaks to the purpose of the plan and the power of partnerships, because there may be things happening in our community behind closed doors, within organizations, within institutions that we're not aware about. So our appeal is report anything that may resemble a hate incident, a hate motivated crime of any kind, and that allows us to address these needs of our community together. So these are early days in terms of where we are with the plan, but the idea is this will lead to action tables and then collaborative solutions so that we can understand what's happening across Waterloo Region and then address these issues together.
Wow, that's important and wise words. Sandy, I saw your name up there, your hand.
Yeah, I think the chief pretty much addressed my question, and I just really wanted to ask to have some dots connected between the world events and how such a big spike occurs and I think you addressed that, unless there's something else you want to add.
We met with members of Jewish community last week, and we had the most available information for the month of October at that point, and there was a number that occurred throughout the month related to property damage, graffiti, that were generally in line with what we were seeing month to month. Anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are amongst the highest reported hate crimes overall across Canada. And so that's the breakdown that Aaron has provided here today is really helpful for us as a service and as a community to understand the nuances of how these actually play out amongst individuals and groups. So we're certainly very focused on these issues, and in the next report, we may see that trend line for 2023 rise. For Q4, we expect that we'll probably be at a peak when it comes to year end. So we'll continue to report to the board any of these trends.
If I could just ask on that piece, then we record by race. Do we include religion as a race, I guess?
Yes, so certainly it is broken down within the report that there's it's one of the components of our regular tracking as well, and that's I think it's on page 150 of the report. It shows the Jewish, Muslim, and other religion totals within the 3 quarters thus far this year. And again, those are largely amongst the highest categories of hate crimes and hate incidents that we see across Canada and locally on an annual basis. Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands, so we'll move on. I think Kirsten's going to join us for the variance report on finance. So straight to Kirsten, unless Chief, you want to introduce it.
No, we hand it over to the experts whenever we can. So Director of Finance, Kirsten, hands over to you. Thank you.
Morning. I'll just share my screen. All right. So within your package today is the September financial results for both the operating and capital budget. I'll touch base on the operating budget first. So from a September year-to-date perspective, we spent approximately 97% of the approved expenditure budget. We were over budget from a revenue perspective at 115%. Therefore, the net levy for September year-to-date was 153 million spent, for 95% of the approved net levy budget. From a year-end perspective, we're forecasting a positive variance to plan of approximately 1.1 million, or 0.5% of the total budget. This is predominantly due to additional revenues that we will be receiving from the province for our court security and prisoner transportation grant program. And the intent is that we are looking to any surplus that we do achieve move to our reserve in order to assist in funding our new central expenditure overage, which I'll talk a little bit about later on. Some of the items that we are over budget year to date include overtime. So year over year, we have a 24% increase in the number of hours year to date. And if we compare that to 2 years ago, it's a 116% increase. So while we are under complement from a sworn perspective, we are at complement from a civilian full-time perspective. And as a result of that, we are projecting greater overtime needs. And we're projecting at this point a $4 million deficit from a year-end perspective. The other item that we're seeing over budget to date is our sick leave payments for members that retire from our organization. And lastly, interfund transfer to our sick leave reserve, which accounts for members that are off on our grandparented central sick bank program. Under budget year to date include lower staffing costs, uniform, firearm, consulting, meeting, travel, and telephone costs to date. We're also seeing some savings related to New Central due to the delay in occupancy of that building. From a revenue perspective, we've seen some greater revenues for some of our grants. So that includes the Court Security Prisoner Transportation Grant of just over $800K, our Community Safety and Policing Grant, and some other provincial grants and external recoveries that were not budgeted for. From a capital perspective, as of October 10th, we spent approximately 57% of the budget to date. We expect to spend approximately 83% from a full year perspective, which would result in $8 million being carried forward to the following year. If you do the math, that technically is a deficit of $1.7 million. However, we are seeing additional grant funds of just over $2 million. So we will remain within budget to date. To just touch upon a couple of the capital projects from a fleet perspective, we have 56 vehicles replaced of 64 planned and 3 growth vehicles that were added to the fleet as a result of some of our sworn officer increases. We've implemented the automated asset and evidence management solution at our new central division. We continue with the replacement of our HRIS system in partnership with the region, and our body worn and in-car video expansion projects. You will note that that's in a deficit expenditure compared to budget, and that's because we did receive a provincial grant for our automated license plate reader units of $1.8 million. And we continue with work towards our next generation 911 project. New Central, we've been busy the last 3 weeks moving into the building, and we expect to turn the building over to the region at the end of this week. So that's been very exciting internally here. We will still occupy a small space for evidence management storage, which we anticipate to be out by the end of the year, and our backup communication center, which we're anticipated to move out earlier next year. As I noted before, it was communicated to us that they expect to overspend this project by $1.8 million. Approximately 50% of that is funded through regional development charges. So the remaining 50%, we would like to be able to fund from our capital reserves and not issue debt. Debt was not issued this fall for this item. So it will be critical that we see positive variances to plan from an operating budget perspective to fund that and mitigate debenture costs. And lastly, just our magazine explosive storage that's been put in place within our region, mitigating travel outside of the region. And you will note again that there seems to be a deficit from an actual compared to a budget perspective, and that will be offset by underspending in our facility security upgrades project, both of which are funded by the capital reserve. Thank you.
Thank you. And before I go to questions, maybe just on that last on the capital or the new central, is that I don't see it as a recommendation here. Is that going to come next month, or is that a recommendation, or is that a motion you'd like this morning?
Typically what happens is if we have a positive variance to budget, there is a motion at that point to move it to an appropriate reserve. At this point, our goal is that is moved to a reserve in order to fund that projected overage for the new central. So it would be a motion that would come forward at a later date. Okay,
that's always looking for. Okay, any questions from the board? I just got a couple. I wanted to you talked about the overtime being over by 116% and a deficit going to be in there, and our staffing costs being under. Are that really two at this point? That's two sides of the same coin. We're doing recruiting and we're not fully complemented. We're making up for that with overtime, the reserve that we have, and that's really to make sure we have the level of service that's required. So that's why you have that reserve, is that you balance out as we work through the plan to do the hiring that we've talked about to achieve levels of services. So is that an appropriate way to look at both overtime and the staffing levels as we recruit?
Yes, it's definitely a multifaceted equation. So depending upon our staffing levels, when we budget for 2 items related to that. The first one is a level of overtime assumed that we'd be at complement. And the second item is a level of salary gapping or position vacancy provisions recognizing that we will see some vacancies throughout the year. When any one of those, if we are under complement from a staffing perspective, that definitely impacts overtime in that members are having to work additional hours in order to provide the services to the community that they receive. So underspending in one line results in overspending on another. The other piece that we sometimes also see is we might use more consultant use as well in order to advance projects that we would have otherwise used internal resources for. So definitely multifaceted. You can't just look at one line.
Okay, one more question. This surpluses, which are one-time savings, wherever they come from, are one-time savings. That's why we have the reserves, so that if we have those, it smooths out the budget in effect, making sure we don't go from deficit to surplus. I guess the question is, at the big start of this, you're projecting 0.5% on a roughly $200 million budget. And if we didn't have the additional provincial revenues that we hadn't anticipated, we basically would be like a zero budget. We would get to a break even, which I run a not-for-profit. That's our goal, is to be zero on the bottom line. That's roughly where we're going to come in at the end of the year.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Definitely, we have our general reserve in case that we do have an overspending position. And in the past, like if I look at the last, 12 to 13 years, there's been 3 years in particular where we've had to dip into that reserve to fund deficits that we've incurred.
Okay, last question. Capital budgets, it looked like about 57%. Of course, we're not fully through the year, but the budgets that we have, those are longer term things. And so it's really becomes, I guess I'm looking for you to confirm this, it's the plans that we have for whether it's vehicle reserve or a new building or new central, take your pick, the plan that's put together and the funding that's the streams, because it's usually years in advance, but it's a timing issue. Like if we're under budget on the capital, it's not that we're not going to do it. It's just that sometimes it's construction delays or sourcing or et cetera. Is that a fair way to look at it? We have a plan, and the expenditure on the capital side it comes down in large measure to that percentage spent as being a timing issue.
Yes, definitely. Through the annual budget process, we do look at a 10-year horizon every year, and we will adjust based upon new information in terms of timing. Yes.
Okay, thank you for indulging me. I don't see any other questions from the board. So, Kirsten, thank you so much for that update. It's always helpful. I think we move on now, and you'll probably stick with the chief as we get on to the 24 operating and capital budget. Over to you, Chief.
Thanks very much. So it's a great privilege to present to you again an update for our 2024 operating capital budget estimates. As you know, this has been a multi-month journey, and really, when I look to our team, I know that this has become a year-round endeavor, that we're focused on building our strategies for a responsible, balanced budget and year-round. So we look forward to walking through the board in terms of our current updates and our recommendations for our current estimates. So carrying forward from previous months, obviously this budget has been crafted with the consent and the help of our community. We're not only grounded in legislative requirements to provide adequate and effective policing across Waterloo region, but also listening to our community. We've been in a period of strategic business planning throughout the year 2023, aiming to build our strategies and our commitments for the next following years. We're also looking at historical trends of former investments in terms of staffing and resources to meet the needs of our community today. So we're looking at meeting the everyday calls for service, investigative capacity requirements, and also looking at planning for the future We know that we're living in one of the most dynamic, most fast-growing regions and municipalities in all of Canada, rapidly diversifying, which provides immense opportunities for our community, but also stress and growth issues related to public service. So through our strategic business planning, our ongoing community consultation, as well as simultaneous consultation through our equity, diversity, inclusion plan, we've also held recently 2 stakeholder engagement sessions for the board. And we recently had today another voice from our community speaking to the need for a sense of balance, fiscal prudence, and accountability when it comes to our total finances. So just to give a snapshot, today's presentation will not focus on issues primarily of crime severity or operational stresses. The board has a regular depiction of that on an ongoing basis. But today is just to talk about a snapshot of our service stresses overall. So right now, tracking into Q3, we are looking at an almost 20% increase in our regular calls for service. And every day, on average, our service is deploying for over 1,000 calls per service per day. So those are calls generated in our 911 dispatch center, as well as some of the officer-generated calls for service that are meeting community needs for frontline investigations and some of the very complex investigations that are required through a specialized capacity. So we're seeing continued growth. And when we look back to the historical landscape in a 10-year time frame, we can see that historically, this region has accelerated in its population growth on an annual basis. The numbers that you see here today do have a bit of a lag. So we know that we're looking at 640 to 650,000 residents of this region in 2023. But historically, our total member to residents ratio has seen a decline over time. Our service has a long-standing commitment to civilianization, seeking to be innovative, agile, responsive to any advancements in policing. So we're very proud of some of those overtures and years, but in total, we have seen a decline in our officer to population ratio as the community has grown, and our total commitment to resourcing this police service has moved forward. So when we look at that snapshot over the course of the last 10 years, we can clearly see that there were periods of non-growth of our sworn personnel. There were periods of no additions to meet those issues of community growth and needs in our community. And so this graphical display shows some of our efforts in recent years to play catch up. And so there is a bit of a swell on trying to meet some of these needs and working partly through our own analysis, but also with the assistance of some consultant expertise last year. It was identified that the recommendation was for a immediate allocation of at least 55 frontline resources to meet calls for service and frontline investigative demands in 2022. And so working on that 3-year plan, our service agreed to stretch that allocation of additional officers over the course of 3 years. We've just completed that first year of the growth plan, and we're seeking to meet the community demands in the second year into the 2024 budget estimate presentation today. Very proudly, we heard from the delegation today about the stress in our community when it comes to economic feasibility for every citizen of this region. We know that there's economic stresses for everyone. And if you look at the historical overlay here, we can see that within Waterloo region, the Waterloo Regional Police Service has had a track record of being fiscally prudent and responsible. And all but one community amongst the Big 12 in Ontario, we have had the lowest cost per resident ratio on an annual basis for some time. And that's something to be proud of. It's something to say that we take in heart the total balance of community needs and how our impact affects every household, every neighborhood, and every individual. But it also speaks to the need for us to always be in comparison with some of our community partners across public safety sectors to understand what is the total need in our community and where do we need to continue to invest despite some of the economic hardships that we see across the region of Waterloo. So now happily turn it over to Director of Finance, Kirsten Hand, who will walk us through some of the drivers and then the nuts and bolts of our recommendation to the board.
Thank you. There's a number of factors that have impacted the budget in 2024 from the prior year. And some of those include increasing rates of inflation. So on our capital side, we have seen cost of construction impact our facility capital projects by 12% year over year. There's also contractual increases that we must factor into budget estimates from our collective agreement, such as cost of living increases. We've seen benefit cost increases, including the enhanced CPP federal program, costs in health and dental coverage, WSIB costs, retiree benefit costs, which I'll note were mitigated in the last collective agreement by the board in grandparenting lifetime benefits and replacing that with the healthcare spending account. And those cost increases were offset by long-term disability cost decreases. We also have the expansion of the 18 sworn members. This also included is a civilian support component, which is determined through a rigorous process through our internal staff planning committee, which reviews business cases to determine areas where the support is required. Investments in frontline technology, such as body-worn video, in-car video, digital evidence management, and security. Reserve contributions, so ensuring that our capital programs are appropriately funded and mitigating debentures issuance and ensuring that our liabilities have adequate reserves to cover those costs so that we're not assigning costs to future generations. And I'll note that these factors were also offset by other efficiencies, such as increased revenues for our court security prisoner transportation grant and our salary gapping provision. Next slide. So for capital, the 2024 capital estimate is just over 30 million. That doesn't include an estimated 2023 carry forward, which will be further defined through the year-end process. And it totals a $279 million forecast for capital. The major change for this year's capital budget forecast over last year was the inclusion of the Regional Public Safety Communication Center. And to just touch upon a couple of the main projects to be covered in 2024 include replacement of equipment vehicle and facility renewal as items reach end of life, continued partnership with the region on the replacement of our HRIS project, expansions in our body-worn video in-car video project to our South Division, continued work on our next generation 911 project to be in compliance with CRTC deadlines. I will note that we have grant funding from our Pride police partners and fire that helps fund that capital project. The replacement of our automated fingerprint system. Again, we are working with our Pride police partners on that project so that we can cost share and see efficiencies from that perspective. The renovation of the third floor of New Central so that we can move the backup communication center space there, which is required for the NG 911 deadlines. And as I mentioned before, starting on design for a regional public safety communication center. Next slide, please. So we did hear from the board and the community in regards to our 2024 operating budget estimate. And as a result, further reviews took place and we reduced that estimate from October to November by $1.9 million. A number of those items were a review of our frontline technology program timing and implementation, as well as decreases to various lines based upon updated spend information. We also reviewed our salary gapping position vacancy provision, which recognizes that we will see vacancies throughout the year, and we did increase that by $500K to $2 million. These two items were offset by an increase to what we're charged for New Central rent as a result of revised estimates for our HVAC system and some small other cost information related to about $7,000. So before you today is a 2024 operating budget estimate of 228,428 million, which represents an increase year over year of 6.71% or 14 million. The assessment growth as communicated from the region remains at 2%. So that then results in a change to property tax for the police portion of 4.62%. This works out to $780 per average taxes for a typical residence, which is increased by $34 year over year. So there's a motion before the board today requesting approval for a 2024 operating budget estimate, as well as a 2024 capital estimate and a 2025 to 2033 capital forecast, subject to the 2023 carried forwards being adjusted. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. And we're just so we're accurate. This is Chief. This is the board's budget estimate. That's what the act says. So that's the language we should use. This is the board's done its work for 3 months, and that's what you're asking approval after all the work and the refinement is the board approved budget estimate, which if it's moved forward would be put into the regional council processes. So if I got that about right?
Yeah, that's correct. We're in a position today, subject to the board's direction, to advance this position for November 22nd, where there'll be a presentation to regional council, and our material is requested to be refined and provided by the end of this week to allow that to be into the right hands and made public as well. Yeah.
Okay. Questions, comments from the board? Nothing. Oh, there they go. I was just no hands up, and then all of a sudden they're there. I think I have Karen first, and then Tony. That was what my eye caught. So start with Karen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to recognize the efforts on behalf of that the senior leadership and all of the leadership that police services has put forward in putting forward this budget. It's not easy work. And I just want to indicate my support, recognizing that this budget is as prudent as possible to provide safe and effective police services for our community. And to go any further, we would likely need to look at reduction of services, which I'm not sure I would support at this point in time. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Karen. Tony.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to echo my colleagues' comments and support as well. I do have one question, kind of comment that I believe Kirsten has indicated, and that is in some of the drivers originally identified, well, obviously one of them is the sworn officers, but you had indicated there's a civilian component as well, right? I just wanted to highlight, because I think in one of our public sessions, someone mentioned we're just using a ratio of sworn officers and we just hire X percentage of civilian. But what I think I heard from Kirsten was that after review of organizational needs, that's really what drove the civilian component of FTEs required. I think that's what I heard, which is a bit of a different narrative than some of the concerns, and I understand some of the concerns raised at the public session. So,
if I could respond, and then I will point to Kirsten just to round out the nuts and bolts of actually how it happens. But we have a lot to be proud of here. Kirsten and her team, but also the executive leadership team. Is connected to networks across Canada, Canadian Policing, CACP, Canadian Association of Chiefs, Ontario Association of Chiefs. And we believe we're operating with a best practice approach to the civilianized component for how we allocate those resources. So There is a common ratio across Canadian policing that roughly 1/3 of most organizations is comprised of civilian professionals. And so what we have sought to do is to instill necessary accountability for how we're innovating. And so when we think about the efficiencies that we're seeking to gain through all our continuous improvement practices, we deploy for civilian professionals a variety of part-time, temporary, and full-time members. And when I can point to areas such as our communicators, so 911 communicators, our special constables, those who are in administrative support or in information technology, we have various innovation and continuous improvement projects ongoing in each one of those areas. And when you think of things like the digitization revolution that we're seeing right now, or how we're refining the work that we're doing annually, when we have multiple projects such as NG911 or any of these things, the growth of the human resource information system, it requires us to have some agility and flexibility. So what we're seeking on an annual basis is, with that recognition that civilian support is absolutely integral to any growth of officers, then we put it to a business case environment where there's a very stringent, regular weekly exercise of evaluation of where are the needs, part-time, temporary, and full-time across the service. And that allows us to be as lean and as efficient, as responsive as things unfold week to week, month to month. So Kirsten, I don't know if I've stolen the total thunder, but I mean, you're at that table often helping our total leadership team evaluate those business cases. So is there anything more to add for your scope on that best practice?
No, I think you covered off very well. Yeah, I mean, I would just say it's a regular, we meet, weekly and review the resource requirements for the organization as a whole, civilian and officers, and future planning. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Chief, and Kirsten, for just adding a little bit more elaboration on that point.
Any other questions? I just have one, and it sort of builds, Kirsten, you did a great job, I think, with us the last meeting, talking about the reserves and how that plays into both the operating and the capital side. I know I wasn't able to join, but I gave that a very good presentation to regional council as well. And I just want to make sure I've got it right, because it feels pretty familiar. The capital program that we have anticipated, which is the long-term planning for our assets, whether renewal, new builds, could be vehicles, etc. In that capital program, which is the one-time expenditures, is $279 million in round numbers, and about 30 million of that to be spent, proposed in 2024. That's where the reserves and the planning reserves come into play, is we have to plan multi-years in advance. And I just kind of recollecting, because that's the first time I've kind of seen the 10-year plan and the 3 years in the way that you've described it, because that looks an awful lot when I was finance chair at the city of Waterloo. That's exactly what the municipalities do, which is have a 10-year plan and then the current year that you fund for the current year you're anticipated. And that would be very much similar to the city of Kitchener, city of Cambridge, the region of Waterloo. That we use that same format as a planning tool and a smoothing tool, but it's not separate and distinct. It's the operating plan, and there are some operating reserves, and then there's the capital program for those specific things, and there's the reserves that fund that as well. Is that, because I think the two are connected? They're not separate. They're connected. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we also do 10-year continuity schedules for our reserve, which interjects into the operating budget, contributes towards the reserve. So yeah, it's all, you have to look at all of those three pieces for sure.
Okay, thank you. Sandy.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to say thank you for the presentations today. I think you've done a really good job of combining the pieces of staffing and crime prevention and increase in crime, along with sort of looking at the region as a whole. And I guess I would ask the chief, is there anything else that you'd like to add that would connect those dots in the context of the budget? Because I think we've worked hard. You've worked hard. Your staff have worked really hard at being fiscally responsible.
I think the only thing I would add, thanks for the opportunity, is, I mean, obviously there's a lot of focused lens on our everyday deployment, our response to investigations, but I think it's important for the board and our community to understand, we're casting our eyes always on the horizon, looking at ways to be innovative, efficient at every turn, but also not looking just to do business the same as we always have. When we mention our commitment and our work and collaboration through the Community Safe and Wellbeing Plan, to us, that is the best way forward to hopefully reduce our allocation of how services provided in the community. And so we need other community partners to come on board to help develop those plans and potentially other modes of service delivery, other solutions, to use the language of upstream prevention and moving to models of not only collaboration, but also mobilization, looking to have better opportunities and solutions in the community. That's where we want to focus our future. But we are stuck in this mode of needing to grow with the expanse of the region. And so it's the stress of meeting today's needs, but also forecasting the needs of tomorrow as well. And we're trying our best as one team to be working well with every partner at the table, and also through the board's direction to meet the stresses of every day. And our members are executing incredibly well on meeting those everyday investigative and service demands. And there's a total balance to all of it. So thanks for that opportunity. I just wanted to bring that fuller picture into it.
Okay, I think everyone, I don't see any hands. I maybe just ask Doug, do you have any comments? And then I'll entertain a motion to from the board. Doug, anything? Oh, you're on mute there, Doug. Someone had to do it. I thought it was going to be me. Nope, still on mute. There you go.
There you go.
Got it.
Okay. Yeah. My wife would have liked that feature. But anyways, the presentation and the way it's set up is clear, distinct, and I think is very comprehensive in terms of an ability for people to really understand what's going on. What I'd like to note is the fact that the police, the board has done a remarkable job in terms of keeping expenditures down. And when you compare that to the regional budget this year and last year, we are somewhat farther down than what the regional councils have done with their own budgets. And it's something to be proud of. So anyways, I'll look forward to the chief coming to council. And I think it will certainly open some eyes for a few people.
Okay, thank you, Doug. I guess one comment I would make, and then we'll go to a motion, is the process this year was, I would say, improved or changed. And I think if we will learn from this year in terms of the timing of public input, et cetera, we'll continue to evolve that moving forward. I think we've benefited from that new process. For my point, this is the product of months of work. So my thanks, along with my colleagues, to the chief, senior leadership team, as well as the board. This is 3 or 4 months in the making. So, and I do fully support the chief's recommendation as putting forward the board approved budget estimate to take to regional council. So with that, I don't see any other hands. I'd entertain there is a motion. If I can get someone to move the motion and second the motion. I see Tony moving the motion, Doug seconding. Any final comments? Don't see any. All those in favor? Any opposed? So that's unanimous. And this does complete at least this portion of the board's obligation under the act to do our work, and then we'll be looking forward. I will look forward on behalf of the board to present, along with Chief Crowell, I think it's November 22nd, to the regional council as we turn over our budget approved estimates for into the regional council budget process. So thank you everyone involved, and I think we are ready to move on. I think Chief, you're up with the monthly Chief of Police report. You're on mute there, Chief.
Well, I get a fresh start then. Thanks very much. I appreciate that. It's an honor to share with you the monthly Chief of Police report. And just going back, it's been a busy month, and certainly a lot of planning for things to come, and a lot of community engagement as well. So we're very honored to have welcomed back our friends from Special Olympics Ontario to make the announcement that the Ontario Special Olympics 2024 Spring Games will be returning to Waterloo Region in May of 2024. These games will bring forward many coaches, athletes, staff volunteers, and spectators from across Ontario and across our region for an incredible celebration of athleticism and also the human spirit. So we look forward on reporting the evolution of bringing the games to our region, and we know many community partners will be helping to champion and support this initiative. Also looking at transition and change, we know that we've opened a new police facility, but we did have the formal transition happen just a couple of weeks ago, where we moved out of old Central Division on Frederick Street into our new facility. So many years of collaboration with the Region of Waterloo and members from our team at WRPS to bring this incredible facility to light that will serve our community and also our members for decades to come across Waterloo Region. So a wonderful undertaking there. Also looking at some of our investigations, it's hard to pick. There's many success stories every day for how our members are intervening. This is just one snapshot of work done by one of our drugs and firearms unit teams, where we intervened in a drug investigation related to the trafficking of illicit substances, and a number of charges were laid as displayed on the screen. Just looking at a daily occurrence for our specialized teams that are seeking to intervene on this landscape of drug and firearms related activity across the region. Also looking at a very dynamic investigation conducted by our property and financial crime unit that intervened with an in-depth fraud investigation that was seeking to target the equity held by victims in their homes. And through investigation, it was determined that there was a defrauding of 7 victims out of over $1 million total. So we know that the growth of cybercrime and traditional forms of fraud continues on a global basis, but also locally. There's complex frauds happening within our region. So our members are certainly attuned to the victimization on the financial front that occurs in our community. Looking at some other connected announcements, we were very happy to host the launching of the Mothers Against Drunk Driving Canada Red Ribbon campaign, which brings awareness about the impacts of impaired driving in all its forms. And so we launched this with all of our emergency services partner last week. And this also speaks to our commitment to the local Festive Ride campaign, which is our enforcement and engagement opportunities related to impaired driving. And we've seen there's been a continued disappointing increase in impaired driving across our region thus far in 2023. So we've launched the Festive Ride campaign as of this week, and it'll carry through the holiday season. So we look forward to engaging with the community. The vast majority of residents of this community certainly have the message that impaired driving in all its forms is not acceptable. Looking also at our road safety efforts through the month of October, we saw a continued rise of some of the fatal 4 offenses and our commitment to road safety efforts across the region of Waterloo in all its forms. And some of those facts are displayed on the screen there. Also looking at our commitment to remembrance. So there was 15 distinct Remembrance Day ceremonies held across the Waterloo region over the 2-week period. There's one more this weekend. And we look forward to not only supporting these events logistically with traffic and auxiliary and band and chorus support, but as well as attending these events in accordance with our regular operations as well. And we're very pleased to welcome a number of civilian professionals and also sworn officers through a new employee orientation program this week. And we've launched a new recruiting campaign to bring talent into the organization on a regular basis. And this week hosted soon new orientation with a visit from Special Olympics Ontario as well to supplement some of their orientation. And also we were celebrating across Ontario Crime Prevention Week, looking to increase the level of awareness, education, and prevention in all forms of crime and crime prevention throughout Waterloo region and across this province. So there was a number of active campaign initiatives that we were engaged with this week. And also, as usual, we've been engaged in a number of community events. Just highlighted a couple here, which are Overtures Beyond Waterloo Region, where our members are integrated with the Association of Black Law Enforcers, Diwali events locally that will continue to celebrate through the course of this weekend as well, and also our regular commitment to Serving with Pride, which is a provincial organization with national linkages, looking at instilling incredible inclusion and diversity across our profession and certainly here in Waterloo Region. So that is a snapshot of a number of activities, our regular community engagement. And on behalf of both Deputy Chief Fenton and Deputy Chief Davis and our senior leadership team, very proud to present that Chief's report, subject to your questions or comments. Thank you.
So you had nothing on the go this month, Chief. Any comments or questions from the board? If not, thank you for the report this month. We'll move on. New business. I don't think there is any. Don't see any hands. Future agenda items. No hands. Any information items? Don't think there's anything. Once we are adjourned, members of the media are welcome to log into Zoom with the login details that were provided, where Chief will be available to answer questions from the media. I think that takes us to adjournment. I just want to recognize that we're done before. We didn't go over today, so thank you for your to my colleagues and to the Chief and your team for getting us through the agenda. Motion to adjourn. Doug and Sandy. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? No one opposed.